Welcome back to the show, guys. Today we have on Jason Tarver. Jason is currently the defensive coordinator for the Oakland Raiders. The purpose of this interview is to get an inside take, on just rising through the coaching ranks, playing in college, and then rising through the ranks from, I want to say community college all the way to the NFL, right, Jason?
That's correct.
How are you?
Doing well. In the middle of our summer break, still thinking about football and trying to enjoy my family here.
That's awesome. My first question is along those lines. What is it like to have spent a good chunk of your coaching career in Northern California, the Bay Area?
Yeah, we feel really fortunate to be able to have done that, being from Pleasanton, California. That's about 30 miles east of Oakland. So being from there and being able to spend 10 years with the 49ers, a year with Stanford, and going on our second with the Oakland Raiders has been very fortunate and outstanding that our families can be around and be able to get to the games and see how we're doing.
I can only imagine. That must be, like you said, you must be very fortunate. Now let's just step back in the Wayback Machine. Take us to your days of playing DB at West Valley.
Yeah, West Valley, that was outstanding. That was a good time. It was very fortunate at Santa Clara University. I had to battle to be able to make it, go to Santa Clara, and then I drive over, go to practice at West Valley, and then I take some classes at West Valley at night. But it was a battle to get Santa Clara to release me because they had dropped football. My senior year in high school, they dropped football, and I got a scholarship to Santa Clara for academics, but I still wanted to play. So my freshman year, I had to rehab a knee that took me about 18 months, and then my junior year, I was able to play at West Valley. And then beating myself up pretty good after that. Started coaching at West Valley my senior year at Santa Clara.
Wow. Okay, so let me get this correct. Okay, so you're playing now. West Valley is a community college, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you're playing JUCO football, and you're going to Santa Clara. Let's just say not on the side, but concurrently.
Yes, at the same time. So I go to class at Santa Clara during the day, and then I drive over to West Valley, go to football practice. One time I even had to take a test in my uniform so I could make it. So as soon as I got out of the test, I got my truck and drove over to West Valley and covered the first kickoff. So it didn't even stretch, didn't do anything, got out of my truck, went on the field, tied my shoes, had about 5 minutes and covered the first kickoff.
I mean, at that time, back then, did you know that this was for you to coach, or was it just, hey, I want to play, and this is part of the deal right now?
I just probably really didn't get enough of this game. I like the game because of the contact, but also how complex it is, or can be. We try to make it multiplicity through simplicity with the Raiders, meaning we look like we do a lot, but it's simple for us and hard on them, and we approach that at the end of the year. But I just fell in love with those aspects of the game, and when I didn't have that, when I wasn't playing my freshman year in college, when I was rehabbing my knee, I just knew I had to do whatever I could to try to play and continue in the sport.
Now, the elephant in the room, if you will, is that your degree was in biochemistry?
That's correct. My master's degree is in biochemistry from UCLA.
Okay, what was your undergrad at Santa Clara?
My undergrad was at Santa Clara was in chemistry.
Okay, so now you're starting to tear up the parameters of like a logic with this. So you're taking chemistry, you're playing JUCO ball at it's one thing if you're doing it at the same facility, same campus, okay, but you're playing JUCO ball at a different campus, and wow.
Well, it's just same thing kind of when I got to graduate school, coaching and doing research. You just keep going through your schedule. You take your classes in your labs, and then you get where you got to get, and you take care of that stuff. I was able to finish a couple higher level math classes at the junior college, so that was good. You know, they could count at both schools. And then I was able, with my labs and my chemistry classes, I was able to have enough units to where in the off season I only had to take classes at West Valley Junior College during the football season because I had plenty of units when I wasn't there. So I made it over in the off season to weight train with those guys, and but it was good. It was a full schedule, but it was fun.
So what did you research at UCLA?
At UCLA, I went to UCLA. I got into UCLA medical school and graduate school. But I had coached my senior year at West Valley, my senior year at Santa Clara. I had coached, and I kind of fell in love with it, coaching and teaching. My whole family's in some form of education. Both my brother and my sister are teachers. My dad works for the government, and my mom was a teacher. So all of us are in education in some form or another. And I figured I got into UCLA for both medical school and for graduate school for chemistry. But if I took the graduate school for chemistry, I could still get into medical school at some point, and I could teach, which is what I wanted to try out. So I was able to get in, get a bunch of my units done, and then get the graduate assistant for football. So there was a period of time where I was coaching and teaching at UCLA for about 2.5 years.
So, okay, pit stop in this interview. You're pretty much an all-action guy. There's not really ever any I'm not saying that you don't take breaks or that you don't have downtime, but you're always juggling some major things at one time.
I'll tell you what, you go through this deal once, so I figure I'll try anything, which of course within the means of the law once, but I'm not happy unless I'm absolutely trying to create something and doing something. I like that challenge. I like being told what I can't do. And I was told what I can't do out of high school. I was told what I couldn't do in college, and told that I can't be a defensive coordinator in the NFL. And I like telling the best athletes in the world what they can't do and seeing how they respond, because most of them are going to rise to the challenge. That's why they're there.
So transitioning from UCLA, tell us a little bit about your time at UCLA. Were you on the offensive side or defensive side?
I was on the defensive side, and I was fortunate enough to be at UCLA the last time that we went to the Rose Bowl, and that was the 1998 Rose Bowl, and 1998 season, 1999 Rose Bowl. And there was only one opening on the staff, and Nick Aliotti, who's the defensive coordinator at Oregon, who was one of the guys that started all this for me. He was coming in as the new defensive coordinator, and he had to pick up a few guys to be his graduate assistant to work with him in the secondary and to do some special teams. And he picked me. Him and Coach Toledo picked me. So I'm very thankful for those guys. So I spent 3 years working in the defensive backfield and coaching special teams. First with Coach Aliotti, and then Bob Field, who's a great. He just retired actually a week or so ago as the assistant athletic director at UCLA. He's there forever. He's a great man. So I feel fortunate to be working with some good coaches. But I did the same thing there. I'd be in class in the morning, run across campus, and go coach football, and then sometimes I'd have to go back across campus and teach a lab class at night or whatever I was doing. So we had some good years of doing both and trying to figure out which end of education I wanted to be on, teaching or coaching.
How did the opportunity to be with the 49ers, how did that come up?
Well, that was interesting. That was I just finished my third year at UCLA, and the Niners had one opening for a defensive assistant, and Don Johnson, who's the D-line coach at the San Diego Chargers, knew Steve Mariucci and those guys at UCLA, and I didn't know he was going to do it, but he said, I have the perfect guy for you, Coach Mariucci, Coach Walsh, because Bill Walsh was still in the building at that time, and Terry Donahue was the general manager. So he called all three of those guys for me. And then it took a while, but I got in front of them, and then finally I was offered a job by the Packers and a job by the Niners, and Coach Mariucci told me, don't do anything. Just hold those guys off until I call you back. I don't know when it's going to be. And he talks with his hands, of course, like you see on the NFL Network. And he's talking with his hands, and you could tell through the phone. So he called back, and it happened to be 30 minutes later, and he said, get your little butt on a plane. So I did just that, and at the end of that day up with the Niners, I interviewed for a day, in a room with Coach Bill Walsh and all the coaches in there, about 40 guys, and they asked me about everything. Just wanted to make sure that I really did love football and that it wasn't just going to be to say I was doing it. And they gave me keys to the van, and I went and spent the night with my dad that night. So, long story short, kind of short, that was how it happened. Just kind of got in front of them, and what happened was the Niners actually created a position for me, which is rarely done. They actually hired two of us, myself and Dan Quinn, who is now the new defensive coordinator of the Seahawks, and they threw us in a room. They threw us in a room and put me on offense and put him on defense and told me don't come out of the room until I knew the whole playbook. And then Bill Walsh asked me 10 questions when I came out of the room, and I had to get them all right before I could get out of the room.
Wow. Okay, so I have two questions that spawn off of that. First of all, I love history. I love history of sports. What was it like interacting with Bill Walsh?
Well, I fall right in with you. If I don't know why I'm doing something or I don't know the history of it, I'm not very likely to embrace it without. If you got a good reason and you got history, then, even in a call, even what we do with the Raiders now, if we're going to use it, there's got to be a good reason. And that was amazing. The history of that building was still intact because Coach Bill Walsh was in there, and John McVay, who was the general manager, he was still in there. Bill McPherson, who was a lot of people don't know, but he was a defensive coach for 25, almost 30 years at the 49ers and never left, even though he was offered head coaching jobs. He stayed either as a defense coordinator with Coach Walsh and then Coach Seifert after him. So that history was amazing. And then to be switched from defense to offense to learn what everybody calls the West Coast offense, what better opportunity can you get than that? I mean, I was happy with my measly little salary, even with a master's degree, which, could have been 5 times that had I taken a job in chemistry, and I didn't care. For that reason, for what you just said, the history of football, the history of that West Coast offense, and what's great is that preparation system. It's why you see so many guys that have that Bill Walsh lineage or Bill Parcells lineage, is their system for preparing players weekly to win games. And, you can go down the list of those guys, but that was great to be able to see why that system was put together.
Wow. We'll definitely come back to systems and preparations a little bit later in the interview. My second question, you see a lot of guys, whether they're former players or they're people like you who start off as being offensive quality control. What does that mean? Like share with us what that means for those of us who are not. I think if you don't get to the college level or even pro level in football, you don't understand what quality control guys do. So other than look like and act like the rest of the coaching staff.
Right. What a quality control coach does is they gave it the name out of business. And what a quality control coach guy is somebody that's constantly checking results. So if you're in charge of quality control in an organization or a business, then you're just constantly checking results. So how that translates to football is this. You're constantly looking at, what you did on 1st and 10, or to start a series. What did you do? Did you run or did you pass? You're looking at your own tendencies, and you're putting in the computer all the data, both for your offense or defense and your opponent's offense or defense. So you put in the data. So you got to learn what the coaches want, everything called, and make sure that data and that film and everything matches up. So you work closely with the video people. You work closely with the pro personnel or the scouting people so you understand the different personnel groups that are on the field. Does the opponent have 2 tight ends on the field? Do they have 3 tight ends on the field? Those type things. So that's the main responsibility of quality control coach, is to handle high amounts of data quickly to give the coaches the necessary, hey, last time it was 2nd and 10 after we ran every time, coach, 2nd and 10 after an incomplete pass. Do you want to change the tendency or not? Have they worked? No, they haven't been working. Okay, we're throwing. Those type of situations. That's where quality control coach can help, and that's why you see a lot of quality control coaches continue to move, because they learn about everything, and then they kind of go to they can see all the different positions as well. So you'll see a lot of coaches start that way, and most coaches need to start that way so that they learn how everything works.
That's good. Now, you're obviously a defensive coordinator. What was it like? Explain to us some of the benefits of starting off in the NFL as a offensive or on the offensive side. Sorry.
Well, one, we had already talked about it, but the West Coast offense was the most famous, one of the most famous offenses, if not the most. So to learn what an offense is thinking in certain situations is great. Did I know I was going to end up back on defense? No. When I went to the 49ers, I spent 4 years on offense, got to be in a room with Tom Rathman as he coached the running backs. Nothing's better than that because he knows the offense. First he played in it, then he created how to coach it, and now he's the best in that offense, coaching running backs, been doing it forever. So to learn it from him was outstanding. And you also learn how to attack it. So you learn how protections work, how the run game works, what really hurts a run. A lot of the things that we teach with the Raiders on defense is we don't want the offense to be able to draw pretty pictures on the board and draw their lines that you see when a coach has a chalk talk. We want to destroy lines. We're about destroying the offense and causing havoc. Whether we're blitzing or not, it doesn't matter. So that was the benefit, is you learn how offenses do everything.
So after you became the quality control guy, you moved up the ladder, if you will, to being the running back's offensive assistant. Was that just more of the same, but just more of at a position, more of a position coach type of deal?
Yeah, that was. I had a piece coaching the running backs because it was with Coach Erickson and his staff, and I did a lot of the protections. I was responsible for the pass protections in that system, so it was a little bit of a promotion. You're in the NFL, you're just like a player. If you're under contract and you're an assistant coach, unless you're interviewing, of course, for a head job, if you're under contract, they don't have to let you go anywhere. In other words, if some other team wants you and you're an assistant coach, whatever team you're with, you're just like a player. If you're under contract, you're under contract. So that a lot of times what guys will do is they'll give you little things to help out the team, but also if somebody wanted you, then they'll kind of change your title at times. So I had more responsibility. I was in charge of protections and some other things like that.
Okay, and after that, you moved to the outside linebackers. Is that now, okay, you mentioned earlier that you weren't, you're a defensive guy, and, to get on the offense and to learn from Bill Walsh and Erickson about the West Coast offense, that's a blessing. What was it like going back to the defensive side?
Well, I was originally going to stay on offense when Coach Nolan came in and Mike McCarthy was the offensive coordinator. But then Mike came in one day and said, hey, I know you're a defensive guy by heart. I really want you, to come on over to the defense, learn what I as the Ravens defensive coordinator, a dominant defense, and help me transition this whole staff. He said, I want you to be the right-hand man between me and the defensive coordinator and yourself, and I know you can do it. And I said, wow, that sounds like a good opportunity. That's the Ravens defense. All right, I learned this West Coast offense. Now let's learn this. And so it was great. So from there, I was the outside linebackers coach, and I still did some of the quality control work at first. And then I became the outside linebackers coach. And then when Coach Singletary became the head coach, he hired his nephew Vance, and then I had the linebacker room, and that was amazing because you had Patrick Willis, and we drafted Navarro Bowman, Ahmad Brooks, Paris Harrelson. I can't say enough about those guys, and grew real close with those guys and built that base of that great defense that they're playing with now. Couldn't be more happy for those players. Those are some of the best people and best players in the world. The Justin Smith, Paris Harrelson, Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman. Couldn't be more happy with those guys. So Coach Nolan gave me the opportunity to go back and do that. And being in the linebacker world, right in the middle of the defense, you had to learn how both the run and the pass worked. It was great learning and great development for all of us.
Now you held that position for 5 seasons?
Yeah, the title didn't change a lot, but it was 6 seasons. I was on defense with the 49ers, and it was outside linebackers. First we started with some quality control, but I kind of just did a little bit of everything, keep the defense going, but I was in the linebacker room the whole time. What happens a lot in the 3-4 defense is you'll put your linebackers together sometimes, and then sometimes you'll separate them because the outside linebackers do a lot more pass rushing. Like you'll see the 3-4 teams look like a 4-3 on third downs, where those outside linebackers will put their hand in the ground. There's plenty of them. DeMarcus Ware, Ahmad Brooks. You go down the line. Okay, Alden Smith. I could keep going, but all those guys, they play up and they play down in a 3-point stance. So a lot of those teams will specialize with those outside linebackers. So sometimes they're with the D-line, and sometimes they're with the linebackers. So what we could do is we move our drills around. We still do a similar thing with the Raiders. Sometimes our edge rushers will come with me because that's one of the things that I've done a lot in my career. So in other words, a lot of 3-4 teams have one and or two linebacker coaches so that they can give the players specifically what they need during practice.
Okay.
Your off-the-ball inside linebackers, your Patrick Willis, Navarro Bowman, they're going to go work more things on their eyes and their vision and coverage, and your outside linebackers will be working more pass rush things like they do with the D-line at times. So that way you can move them around and separate them into drills and practice to maximize their growth as players.
Okay. Now, you then went to Stanford. How did that opportunity come up?
Well, as in these things, and I kind of give you the history when I talk to you. There's a million different ways and timing and all these things that happen, but I was all set to stay, and Coach Harbaugh was going to keep me as the outside linebackers coach at the 49ers. So I was working with him for about 3 weeks, and then some guys that I knew, and Stanford was looking for a co-defensive coordinator with a defensive backs guy, Derek Mason, who's an excellent football coach, who's their defensive coordinator right now. And so David got some calls, and I got some calls on David, and Dave said, hey, look, I don't always do this. I interviewed a couple guys, but I can't find anything bad wrong with you. I said, well, I haven't heard anything bad about you either. He goes, okay, come over. So I went over, and I interviewed one morning in the middle of recruiting, and then a couple weeks later he put together a package, and we went over to Stanford, which was a great opportunity to have a young family. We had a great time on that campus. Should I had Coach Allen and Reggie McKenzie not recruited the heck out of me, I would stay there forever. That's the greatest place on earth.
Here we're gonna.
So it's kind of like a lot of these things happen in coaching. You get word. There's word out there, and then people call, and both sides do their research, and then if it works, if you get along personality-wise, then you'll make the move.
One of the questions I have while just researching you, and it's a question that's come up. It comes up pretty regularly. Whether it's Chip Kelly or Nick Saban, or it doesn't matter. What is the difference? What are some of the challenges between coaching college athletes and pro athletes? Obviously, there's pretty apparent answers for both, but in your estimation, like how do you get to them? How do you get them to understand concepts? Okay,
so I'll start with really the draw to coaching college athletes is you get this 17, 18-year-old, sometimes they're grown up, but sometimes they're just, big kids, and then they leave you as college degree men. So that age is neat because you watch them learn and experience everything, and you just feed them information. That's the draw to coaching college, is because you just watch these guys grow up. In the NFL, they're the same way. They come in, they don't know anything, but your veterans, they know things. And the biggest difference is this. The NFL athlete and the professional athlete in any sport, you can't lie to them. You can't feed them a bunch of a bull or say this is going to work, because they know enough to say, hey, man, you can't just tell me to do this. I need to know why. And that's probably the biggest difference. A lot of times in college you can just say, hey, do this. And they'll ask you why, and you give them the reason, but you can still say, hey, do this, because they're not grown yet. So ways of reaching both college and NFL players, hey, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And everybody does a lot of the same things. They call it different names, but it's a matter of trusting each other and watching. Our job is to just is to help these guys get better, whatever level you're at. And then our other job as coaches is to get 11 of them, well, defensive coaches, is to get 11 guys to fly around and tackle the guy with the ball and get the heck off the field and get the ball in your offensive hands. That's it. 1, to get them better, and 2, to get off the field. That's all you're doing. And so if you approach them in that manner and talk to them in those ways, that's the biggest key. This will get you better. Here's why. Let's go try it. And then to have feedback back and forth with your players. The Stanford student-athlete is great for that because if they don't know why, they aren't going to do it. They're too smart. But if you tell them why and you show them results, they will do it full speed and they will conquer. You've seen them do it. You've seen what that place has done with the change of Coach Harbaugh in the last 7 years. Those student-athletes, they give themselves to you as long as they know why. And same thing in the NFL, sometimes for a different reason. The NFL player is so highly, a lot of them are very, very, very intelligent, and they've seen every scheme, and they want, okay, I see how that all fits together, Coach. I'm good. You get a lot of those, and it's different. You coach a rookie a little different than you coach a 10-year veteran in the NFL.
Now, you mentioned it earlier, just that Reggie McKenzie recruited the heck out of you to leave Stanford. What did you see the opportunity as? Was it, what was presented to you? I mean, we don't have to go back to the whole process, but, No,
I won't. I'm just trying to give you a little background when I answer you on the differences, but, no, I won't go through the whole process. The biggest thing is this. I grew up sitting in the end zone watching John Boyd play at Stanford. That's where my dad took us, and I grew up sitting in the black hole. So to enact this change and to help the silver and black and the black hole play defense like I remember them playing defense, which is Mike Haynes, Lester Hayes, stick them everywhere, nobody open, people getting hit, the offense back with the ball, the black jersey meaning something. To bring that back to the Raiders fan base was my draw. And now you'll hear me get a little more passionate about it. That's my draw. As I grew up as a little kid, that was my dream job. So I knew Dennis Allen just a little bit, hey, how's it going? And I didn't know Reggie. They waited for me to be able to interview me at the end of the college recruiting because I was not leaving till the end of recruiting. But that was the draw to me, is what greater challenge in life than to bring in that defense, the silver and black, to where it needs to be and where I remember it.
Now, the other thing, too, we sort of touched on it with the NFL to college comparison. Now you're the head man on defense. How much more of a burden or of a responsibility is that on you preparation-wise?
I've been prepared. Even you said it, the quality control and the steps of quality control. It's not any more of a burden. The biggest thing that you want to do is it says coordinator for a reason. What we did at the Raiders is, Dennis Allen and I didn't necessarily run the same schemes. Our schemes barely even overlapped. But what we did is we went in a room and said, what's best? What is the best scheme for our personnel and the Raiders going forward? What's the best? And then we said, okay, how do we call that? How do we name that? So we went in a room, and a lot of people say they do this, but we actually did. We went in a room and started from scratch. So the processes of calling games and building game plans and all those things, I've been doing forever. And then Stanford, of course, was a great experience being able to do that and do that at a top 10 level for a year in NCAA. So the processes I've been building and thought I knew what I wanted the whole time. But the actual calls that we're using at the Raiders are totally different than by name and sometimes even by scheme than what I've done in the past because we want what's best for the Oakland Raiders.
Now let's talk a little bit about defense, being a defensive coordinator. Obviously, in this conversation, you're the only one who can speak on being a defensive coordinator. But how do you defense is about it's about an atmosphere of just causing the offense to not be at their best. Okay. So I have a couple questions that feed into that. How do you identify leaders on defense? Everybody wants a Ray Lewis, okay? Everybody wants, a Palomalu or, even a Julius Peppers or, a Justin Smith coming off the edge. Not everybody has that. So how do you identify leaders?
Well, people talk about that you have to have the leadership traits and these types of things, but all great leaders were taught how to lead from something or from someone or some process, and most of them are different people in their lives that did it for them. A lot of them are self-motivated, and they just say, hey, come on, man, like a Ray Lewis. But you got to create that environment. In other words, put your players in position. And what I spend a lot of time doing is just watching them interact. And then when you see guys that, they may be, one guy might be a little frustrated with the other 10 based on how it's going. So you go in and you help that guy deal with that, meaning you may say, hey, listen up to him because he's the one that I see trying to stop this thing. You other 10 guys, let's go. So you can help along the leadership process. So what you do is you watch them, and then you see some guys are not going to be verbal. They're just not. Some guys are very verbal. Some guys are too verbal. So you just try to give them the beans within, some guys talk too much. So you say, hey, just be quiet a little bit over here. Blame it on me. Or, hey, over here, if you need to say anything, for a really quiet player, if you need to say anything, just say, hey, Coach Tarver says, and just repeat what you want the other players to do, blame it on me. Say, hey, Coach Tarver wants us to do this. Let's go. Because then it takes the pressure off them. That's just simple ways to help create leaders. But the biggest thing is to watch them. You got to watch them, and then with our scouts, we're excited about our team this year. We've done a better job of bringing in guys that really care. The biggest thing is, do you love football? If they love football and they got some means of communication, then you can help them get together and play together on the field.
So that feeds perfectly into a let's just call it a hypothesis I've always had, especially about defense, especially about football. What role do you, or maybe not what role, but what emphasis do you put on having a good relationship with your players? When I say relationship, I don't mean just, hey, you're the bandit, you got to do this, all right, Greg, okay. No, I mean what emphasis do you put on being able to call them their nickname? Being able to say, hey, I checked your media guide at college. You weren't as fast as you said you were. What emphasis do you put on that as a head coach trying to build that environment, like you said?
Well, I'll answer it with a history. The number one rule that Bill Walsh had was know your personnel and use your personnel. And that's what he was able to do on offense and defense. So in order to use them, you got to know them, not only what they can do athletically, but who they are mentally. If a guy just can't call a huddle, then don't put him in front of calling the huddle. So in other words, here's one of the things that I do. I walk right in front of the room and I look up because I'm a little guy. Okay, I'm 5'10", 178 pounds. Okay, I got blonde hair. I look like a little surfer. And I look up at the guys, which I spend my whole life coaching looking up, and I say, hey, you guys are going to test me. You're going to test what I'm talking about right now. You're going to test this coaching staff. And you're going to test this because you're going to do some things, and then you're going to look over and say, did he see that? Or did they see that? Well, here's all we want back from you, and this answers that question. We got to be able to honestly communicate back and forth. That's it, about football. The other stuff will happen. But when you go in and you do something, and you come out, and I say, hey, what'd you do? Well, I saw what he did. And I say, hey, what'd you do? And then there's your test. Is that player going to lie to you, or is he going to say, hey, I did this? And then I say, okay, next time that happens, do this. And that's how you start that relationship right there. Because if you don't have that relationship to be able to communicate to each other during pressure situations, then you're not going to win, period. And, one of my favorite examples is Phil Jackson. Watch Phil Jackson when he used to coach, that whistle that he had. When he whistled at Kobe and the boys, what did that mean? That means stay in the moment, get your mind right. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you're over there talking shit, Kobe and Shaq having a fight, whatever. Okay? But now your mind, here we go, something important's happening. And that's what that relationship is. Because that's the only thing else. He just had that big old whistle. I don't have that whistle. I just have more of a look and, some hand gestures. But, that's the biggest key. And that your theory is right on. You have to have that working relationship. It doesn't have to be buddies. It doesn't have to be any of that stuff, but you got to have a mutual respect and trust. In other words, if they come off and said, I did this, and it just happened to not work, well, a lot of times I'll just say, okay, I'll go to the next call. Good job. And then they know that they at least did their job. So when it wasn't perfect, we'll stop them, get them on the ground, go to the next play.
Now, the second question, you kind of, or the next question, you kind of already touched on it a little bit, and it's about preparation. On the defensive side, it's a balance between being reactive and being proactive. How do you prepare? And this is not necessarily supposed to be just pigeonholed to you or your staff or just your players, but how do you prepare your defense or yourself to be able to break down what the offense is doing, and what are your main objectives? I've heard that Belichick likes to, not to say or compare anybody, but he takes away the best option. Are you trying to put the ball in the best player's hands, or are you trying to take away everybody else? Are you trying to take away everybody else and make the best player prove he's the best? Is it case by case? How do you conceptually, week in, week out, how do you break down the objectives of your defense going into a game?
Well, the biggest thing is on that. I'll answer that with an in general first. There's only two things they can do. They can run or they can pass. What are they good at? Who are their best players? You're going to start there because it's a matchup game. It's a matchup game, but there's 11 guys on each side of the ball, so there's 22 moving pieces. So on that point right there that Belichick says, you look at your matchups, but then you know that's 11 guys moving together. So in other words, you're going to have your defense in, and they're going to say, let's use a little bit more of this week because this takes away T.O. Or let's use a little bit more of this call this week, but let's put it over on the left. Or let's have a right blitz because you're playing Michael Vick, I don't know, because he's a left-handed quarterback, for example. So those are the tweaks you'll make. But your scheme has to be taught from day one, especially defensively, because if you try to change every week defensively, it's too hard because you don't know what the offense is going to do. Whereas when you have your core, but you make slight adjustments in your blitzes or you use something more than other things, and that's what Belichick does and most of the good ones, then you can be successful because you got that little tiny tweak. Hey, they did this week. This is the only time they do this, and then all of a sudden it's something different the next week. That's how we function, and that's how most of the good ones function.
Okay. Now, somewhat of a not a trick question, but just an opinion question. What's your biggest challenge in coaching? Is it the relationship aspect that we talked about before? Is it just more so probably or possibly dealing with expectations and reality? Is it, I don't know, you tell me.
I think the biggest challenge of coaching is you don't know how that funny shaped round ball is going to bounce. That, somebody took a rugby ball and turned it into this thing with 8 cross laces and said, we're going to play with this, and we're going to throw the ball forward, and we can throw it backwards. But you don't know how it's going to bounce. So number one is, and why I like it, and the biggest challenge is this. You don't know what that ball is going to do. You don't know what it's going to do day in and day out. And you combine that with a whole bunch of smart coaches and players that can change things really quickly, like Brady, et cetera, Manning. And then you combine that with not knowing exactly how your guys are going to play all the time, and you go into that 3 hour and 6 minute, is about what the average NFL game is, match, and you say, okay, let's figure this puzzle out. That's why I do it. That's why it's a challenge, because it's one of the hardest puzzles that you can figure out, and you won't ever figure it out, because if you did, then nobody would watch the game. But that's the challenge. And the other one is, of course, dealing, people, everybody's different. So in the week, to get everybody to see your vision and your vision that you developed as a coaching staff, and then get them to execute it and to handle situations within a game, I don't think there's anything harder than that. So I was looking for what the hardest, most challenging thing I could do every week. So I think that's it.
Well said. Well said. So, I mean, you're at a point in your coaching career where you've seen a lot. You've seen a lot. What are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way, whether it's just in management or in perspective or just dealing with players? What are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Awesome. Awesome. There's a whole bunch of them. A lot of them in with my time with the Niners and Jim Tomsula and Bill Walsh. Those are probably two of the biggest. Jim Tomsula is still there. He's the D-line coach, as you know, and we just got along great from day one because there's certain things that we think about all the time, you know, which is control what you can control. That's the biggest thing. Everybody wants to think about what's out there, and all that's great, but all you can control is what you're doing at 4:45 in the afternoon, okay, on July 2nd. That's all I have control of. Now, we all got those things we look at, but you've got to stay in the moment. You got to control that. There's another Phil Jackson, but you got to stay in the moment. You got to control what you can control. And if you're one of those 11 on the field, you got to do your job no matter what. Because the most times that football teams or people in life in general float is when they don't control what they control. They bitch or complain or, well, he's got that. So what? If you want that, go do something about it. That would be number one. Number two, it would be winning is a process that ends in a result. You got to have a process built to teach your mind and you don't just walk on the field and win. You got to learn how people are going to react and work together. So you got to have a process that's built. And again, my training helps me with that process that's built with that end in mind. And then by doing that step by step at a time, those will be the two main ones. Control what you can control. I talk to the guys a lot about that.
The second was winning is a process that what? I'm sorry?
Winning is a process that ends in a result.
Okay.
It's a process. You got to build your process, trust your process, and stay in it. That's a lot of the things that I've said today. When you identify those things, there are a lot of people, both football and players, people in life, they go through life without a process. What do you want, and how are you going to get it? Figure that out and then work for that. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to get it. No. It means you've got to constantly adjust your process. But if that's what you want, build yourself a process and go get it.
And that's, I asked that question, and 9 times out of 10, I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. But those two are things that I think that, let's just be candid, those kind of suck to hear when you're trying to do something because you always want to focus on what you're not, what you don't have or what you don't control because it's easier than working on what you do control. And then, nobody wants to hear that winning is a process. That's why we have the lottery, right? I mean, we don't want a process. We want a payday. So those two kind of, like I said, those two kind of suck. But I think that they're very much ones that you should, write down and look at on a daily basis.
I mean, it's just anything. Nothing's given, and that's probably the biggest thing that just for everybody. How to make one of the reasons you get into coaching and teaching or education is to try to make the world a better place. And you're doing that a little bit at a time in football, and where I am in the NFL, you're trying to do that to do something that's never been done before, and that's the greatest challenge. And that you just don't walk out and that happens. You look at where we are with the Raiders right now, and everybody's going to say we don't have anything in the salary cap and this and this and this. So what? We like the guys we got. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to worry about all that stuff, or are you going to go tackle the guy with the ball?
Wow. Well, Jason, this has been a great interview. I didn't foresee the depth and the history being sort of front and center as it was, but this was a great interview. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I enjoyed it. I'm glad I got to talk to you.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for listening, and once again, thanks, Jason.